Meir Weinstein, and I'm joined with Mayor Jolovitz. Again, tonight, we're going to be discussing what would Rabbi Meir Kahane do regarding Israel focused on Hamas in Gaza. What would he do? And there's a lot of issues that we have to discuss. I'm going to ask everyone who's watching, please share this on whatever platform you use, be it Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp groups, Instagram, whatever platform you use. We'd appreciate it. We'll reach a lot more people. So thank you very much. Mayor, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks, given the circumstance.
There's a lot going on right now, and the Jewish people are, there's a lot of unity with the Jewish people right now, especially in Israel. I see it, I'm running into a lot of Jews here in Toronto that I consider to be very much unaffiliated, and right now they're very engaged right now, very concerned, and that's a good thing. So I don't know what you're seeing over there in the States. I hope you're seeing something like that as well.
Well, actually, I'm doing most of my observation looking in the direction of Israel. And the one thing I think is quite telling is that only a half a year ago, there were demonstrations going on for, my God, more than half a year, every Saturday night against the Israeli government. And they all pivoted around this notion of judicial reform. But the real intent of all those demonstrations, and we're talking about demonstrations which would bring out 100,000 strong in Tel Aviv, they were basically demonstrating to get Bibi Netanyahu out of office. And it had picked up a momentum which was quite serious, and people were beginning to speak of a civil war in Israel, which was an insane discussion. The last time anyone had ever uttered a concept of a civil war was when we had in the early 50s, 51, 52, 53, the discussions with Menachem Begin about a civil war, which he did avert on the issue of German reparations. But not since then had there been any discussion where people would speak about a civil war. Nonetheless, it looked like the young people, the left, the liberals had all jumped on the same bandwagon, and they were going to do something about the fact that Bibi Netanyahu was democratically elected, had a term that he needed to fill. They didn't like it, and things looked like they were going south. What's remarkable was October 7th, the atrocity of October 7th, actually had one, I think, unexpected result when it came to the liberal leftist world in Israel. One would have imagined that these would be the people who had lost their resolve to fight, given all their political proclivities. And when we look back now, entering the 5th month of the war in Gaza, the most remarkable, I think, takeaway is that those people who believe that the fight should not end are the young soldiers in regular service and the reservists who are leaving their homes for a month and two and longer, who said that this fight needs to be fought until it's won. So effective was the message that they brought back. This is an enemy that needs to be destroyed. And we've spoken about language being bastardized. Israel is now talking about defeating as opposed to destroying Hamas. But so effective has their support been for this mission to destroy the enemy that the left has actually decided to renege on its promise that we won't be demonstrating during the prosecution of the war, realizing that they were losing this audience, this young audience, and have started demonstrating again on Saturday night, because they were seeing that these young people all of a sudden had this Zionist awakening. We had non-religious people, and I think that's something which one will study in the years to come and realize that there was a shift in Israeli politics as a result of October 7th that the left did not expect.
100%. On that note, many of the Jewish youth who are in the army right now serving, they're wearing a little patch of the Beis Hamikdash.
Right.
It's very significant. What have you heard about that?
Right. No, I've seen it as well. Obviously, from my observation of what happens there, which I spend most of my day doing. And it's a remarkable thing because that patch that you speak about, the Temple Mount, we talk about the third, it's an illustration in essence of the temple, the third temple as it will be. And what's most remarkable about it is the fact that most of these people that you see wearing it, I would venture to guess, were people who've never ascended on the Temple Mount. And yet they understand that there is no element, that there's no subject, that there's nothing in Judaism that is more sacrosanct, that is holier than the Temple Mount. And
Right.
for these young people who did not think that way a year ago, to be displaying that emblem is a remarkable, once again, takeaway of this struggle against evil.
And let me add to that. There's a lot of discussions going on right now in Israel, outside of Israel, that Ramadan is coming up. And there's pressure on Israel that you should just let all Muslims onto Har Bayit, onto the Temple Mount, and do whatever they want. Now, last year and the year before, and the year before that, they've had Hamas rallies on the Temple Mount with flags and banners, and there's been violence, and there's been preaching violence, and there's incredible violence, actually. And the IDF has to go, or the Israeli police has to mobilize and go up there. There's a war going on right now. And the mood is in Israel, get rid of Hamas. Get rid of Hamas. They're a threat, and they see the stats also, the polls taken in Judea and Samaria about the Arabs there. Who do they support? They support Hamas. They felt emboldened by what happened on October 7th. So you do have some ministers in the Israeli government that are saying, hang on, we can't just let, whoever come up here. We have to place some restrictions. And, I think that's a good thing. They have to place enormous restrictions. And I think also it's got to be emphasized that while we have our Jewish youth serving and risking their lives in Gaza, and they're wearing the patch with the temple, where's the reawakening with Jews to say, hang on a second, they want to come up to the Temple Mount? We have to discuss the rebuilding of the temple. Where's the reawakening amongst Jews to get into that discussion properly? We wanted to defeat an ideology, so we have to.
Let's remember that the Arabs fraudulently called this assault on Israel, this war that they launched on October 7th, they called it Al-Aqsa, as if to suggest that this was in reaction to the Jewish presence or occupation of the Temple Mount, which is as fraudulent as anything and everything that they engage in all the time. I saw a commentator on Israeli television, not someone who would otherwise be identified with any Jewish or religious issue, and they were talking about Ramadan coming up and whether or not Israel was going to somehow be a little more forgiving and allow greater numbers of Arab worshippers to go up in the Temple Mount. And of course, there's resistance to it because of the obvious problem that it could bring. So this commentator lashed out and said, why do we have to respect their religion? And he reminded us, he said, do we forget that they attacked us on Yom Kippur in 1973? Do we forget that they attacked us almost purposefully on Simchat Torah?
Absolutely.
So they have chosen our holidays and the most important holidays in order to attack and kill Jews. And we're sitting there in the Knesset trying to decide how liberal we should be in allowing them their presence in the Temple Mount. Now, this is an opinion that was expressed by a commentator who might not have said as much a year ago or 5 years ago. October 7th, the most tragic day in modern Israel's history, was a wake-up call. And the expression that I've often offered, and I hope that I'm wrong, is that I fear, because I've seen too often, that the Jewish response has been a good one, but it has a shelf life. I'm hoping this case, or in this particular situation, this episode will not be one which has a shortened shelf life. That we have learned a lesson and we do what we need to do.
I hope you're wrong as well.
Yeah.
No question about it. I mean, it would be
Yeah.
absolutely horrible if, I mean, it's been going on for 4 months already. And to see all of a sudden Jews abandon this and go back to how they were before, right to the left, and let's bend over backwards for our enemies, give them the benefit of the doubt. I hope that's not the case.
Yeah. On the last segment that we did, I mentioned, and before we end this segment, I'd like to come back to it. There needs to be a wake-up call as well in the political world in Israel. There has to be an accounting that Israel needs to recognize, given the anti-Semitism that we've seen sweep the world, and all the proclamations by all these international organizations, the condemnations at the United Nations, the condemnations coming from the European nations, from Congress people, from the Democratic Party, and so on and so forth. There needs to be some kind of wake-up call on the part of Israeli politicians that we don't have as many friends as we thought we did. And if we think that by sitting back and doing the right thing, the moral thing, our friends were going to support us, well, in the last 4 months, this has been proven time and time again to be an absolute fraudulent expectation.
Yeah, 100%. You know, there's pressure on Israel regarding arms from the United States, that Israel seems to be reliant on the United States. We need a resupply of various munitions. And, you know, I was listening to a good presentation by Jonathan Pollard, you know, a real Jewish hero. And he was going on to say that really Israel should develop the arms supplies that they need, the equipment that they need, and they can do it fairly quickly, and they have the proper technology to do it. New 3D technology, and he said not only that, but it would open up another industry for Israel for exports as well. You know, I'd like to hear your thought. And also, let me just say that the rabbi, when he was alive, he was extremely upset when Israel canceled the RABBI project, which would have been the most sophisticated fighter jet in the world. And with the technology that Israel has right now, and the incredible Jewish brains that exist in Israel, I mean, it could be a super powerhouse if they're not reliant anymore.
Israel's GDP today, once again, we've spoken about this in the past, does in fact allow Israel to do that type of innovative industry. Yesteryear, in fact, when Moshe Aarons was foreign minister, defense minister, and the Lviv was a project of his, the United States actually exercised its economic leverage against Israel, which did rely on certain contributions from America. That is no longer the case. Invariably, it seems that I often point the finger in our direction as well, that we're at fault for allowing ourselves to be bullied, pressured into concessions that we otherwise know are not in our best interest. It was only a couple of years ago that Israel's very high command, I'm talking about its military high command, as well as part of its intelligence apparatus, came to believe, and they still do, and there's an issue that needs to be discussed as well. Why would the people who in fact failed to prevent October 7th from happening, why are they the ones prosecuting the war? Why are they prosecuting a war as a tactical war rather than a strategic war? That is something which needs to be questioned every time. But the more important thing was, why did they surrender almost voluntarily at the American suggestion that Israel downsize its military capability, that Israel rely less on its brilliant manpower, as we've seen in previous wars, and more on the high tech. And that's exactly what Israel did with the thinking that, well, if we have enough sophisticated jets, and admitting that the jets of the next generation are going to be pilotless, that there's really no need to have this incredible army which has defended Israel so many times in its modern history. Well, October 7th was a slap to our face, and we realized that our own, Israel's own high command, its military high command, was absolutely wrong in the way that they projected the way that wars might be fought in the future, and that we needed to downsize. We didn't need this larger, cumbersome reserve army. We had an influx a generation ago of a lot of Jews from the Soviet Union, from Russia, and all of a sudden the numbers changed. Less people were needed in the army, less roles were assigned, which today we find out were absolutely instrumental in defending Israel. It's going to take a few years for us to recover, but we need to recover. That was a terrible, terrible miscalculation of the way that wars will be fought. And the best evidence of it is, and we've all seen the Hamas films, is you're talking about these cavemen, these barbaric savages, armed with their RPGs and motorcycles and their jeeps and everything else. And they came and they breached. They came into Israel as superpower and delivered some damage that should never have happened. It should never have happened. There needs to be some accountability. There will be some accountability. I don't know if it'll be completely legitimate, because it seems that the people who were responsible are going to somehow, to a certain degree, investigating themselves. But nonetheless, the way that Israel was preparing for this war that they didn't expect to happen, and that again is a conversation for another broadcast, is that Israel was under the complete misunderstanding that if the Arabs were somehow a little more economically viable, that if we let Arabs in from Gaza and Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, into Israel, that the fact that their pocketbooks would look better than they would if they were working in their own respective lands, that they would somehow be mollified, that they would be moderate. And we realized that that was exactly the wrong thing to do. And it remains a discussion. Do we allow these workers ever going to come into Israel? Or do we simply allow for those tasks that we're looking for, that type of labor, to bring in workers from Sri Lanka or Thailand or what have you? All these things have to be discussed. But Israel that happened, the Israel that we had October 7th, the Israeli military that we had October 7th, the Israeli intelligence that we had October 7th, and I'm talking about the personnel who were running it. They failed us. They failed us. And they cannot be allowed to continue to lead us.
We see these extreme leftist protests going on in Tel Aviv, and they hide under the banner of free the hostages, and they call for new elections immediately, and they don't represent the majority of the public, mind you. So they call for immediate elections. They call for Netanyahu to step down immediately. There is no accountability. There's no words from them about these generals, about these intelligence agents that failed Israel miserably. Why is that? What's going on here? And the media picks it up big time.
Yeah. Actually, there's a very simple answer. If you look at the last half generation, all these generals, when they finish their military service, most of them go into politics, and they go into politics left of center.
Yeah.
So these are the people, they're not going to criticize them, because these are the people who are going to be joining, I would say, Labor. There might not be a Labor Party anymore, but they're going to be joining that left of center element, and there's no need for them. What they do is they do blame Bibi Netanyahu, which isn't to suggest that Bibi didn't have some culpability in this. This is to be discerned. But it's remarkable how he's the one that they're throwing under the bus, rather than, as you said, the head of the military intelligence, the head of Southern Command. These are the people, mind you. In fact, Israel's military, Southern Command, actually issued an order about 3.5 weeks ago, which said that if there appeared to be someone, personnel, people, terrorists, encroaching on the southern border again, they did not have the automatic permission to open fire on these people. Well, what lesson was learned of October 7th? It's remarkable. And the justification for it, which is an obscene one, is that because if we do that, then the Western world will continue to condemn us even beyond the condemnations which we experience today. The lesson that should have been learned is that no matter what we do, we are going to be condemned. So damn it, do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, I
No,
have
there's
no, I was going
there's
to say,
a comedian, Michael Rappaport,
yeah,
been posting videos, funny guy, and he's experiencing a reawakening right now and has been advocating very strong for Israel. So he posts on Twitter yesterday. He posted yesterday that he was in Haifa examining the city, and it's supposed to be have this coexistence. There's I don't know what the ratio is. Maybe it's 50-50 Arabs and Jews there, or slightly different. And he goes to a cafe that's owned by Arabs, and the owner tells him, "You're not wanted here. This is Palestinian. Get out from the river to the sea," and so on and so forth. So he's
yeah,
very upset about that. And, you know, you have this internal problem in Israel. You have an exterior problem that we have. But when they're all saying from the river to the sea and free Palestine, it's good that he woke up. But what's his real conclusion with this? His conclusion is, yeah, Rabbi Kahane was right.
yeah.
Yeah.
There is a fundamental failure on our part to address the obvious. I did an op-ed on this, and I think I might have mentioned it in a number of shows ago, a podcast perhaps with you, and on the radio show that I have also on Sunday, Middle East Radio Forum. And the comment that I made at the time was in response to the ubiquitous language that we heard in the media, where they talked about October 7th in the week and 2 weeks after the attack, and they said in an unprovoked attack on Israel. That was the language that they used, in an unprovoked attack against Israel. Right. And I argued that that was not true. And I actually, in this case, borrowed from Rabbi Meir Kahane, and I'll reference that in a second. It was very much a provoked attack against the Arabs. The fact that there exists a Jewish state of Israel is for the Arabs a provocation. So the suggestion that this was an unprovoked attack is to misunderstand the Arab mind. It was a number of years ago, I think it was in the early 1980s, Rabbi Kahane was arrested, once of many, many times that he was arrested.
Right.
He was arrested for incitement. One of the many, many times he was arrested for incitement. He was inciting the Arabs in Israel with some of his public proclamations and pronouncements and in his speeches and everything else. And he came before Jewish judges sitting there, and they were accusing him of inciting the Arabs. And in his opening remarks, he said the logical, common sense, and brilliant observation. He pointed to the emblem of the state of Israel, which was on the wall, hanging on the wall behind the judges, and he said, I am not the element that provokes the Arabs in Israel. That emblem of the state of Israel behind you is what provokes the Arabs of Israel. I am not the inciter. And he said, the Israeli flag that was hanging in the flagpole as I entered this courtroom, the Israeli flag with a Star of David on it, that is what incites the Arabs. That is what incites the Arabs. It is not. It was a brilliant, common sense appraisal of the real situation that others simply refuse to recognize. The presence of a Jewish people in a Jewish nation in the Middle East is considered to be a stick in the eye of the Arab Islamic world, and they won't have it. And so when we talk about incitement, the incitement comes from our existence, just as the unprovoked attack that I referenced. No, they considered it to be provoked by our presence, and we can't lose sight of that fact. If you don't understand that, you're not going to understand the conflict. It is not, and we've said this before when we talked about geostrategic issues, this isn't a conflict about territory. This isn't about occupation. And when they talk about occupation, Anthony Blinken thinks the occupation was the occupation of June 1967. And if you ask the Secretary of State, why was there no peace in 1966? Well, he might struggle to give an answer. And beyond that, if you say, why was there no peace? Why were Arabs killing Jews in 1920, 1921, 1929, beheading Jews? And we know the answer, but those people who seem to think that they're smarter than we refuse to acknowledge the truth.
You have a group, Peace Now and J Street, a few others, New Israel Fund, and they believe there's voices on the other side to speak to. In fact, the New Israel Fund is having an event. I think it's in about a week. New Israel Fund of Canada, and they're bringing in a speaker, an Arab woman from Israel. And on October 7th, she posted on her Twitter that this is the result of the occupation. So who are we talking to? On the one hand, she's supposed to be this nice Arab Israeli citizen who considers herself a Palestinian, that makes that outrageous comment on her social media. On the other hand, we have all these different pro-Hamas rallies where they're screaming from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, fully endorsed by every major Islamic organization. I haven't seen one speak out against it. And then somehow we're supposed to have some kind of recipe, a path forward for some kind of a two-state solution, living in peace and harmony, trade, going to their cafes, they're coming to our cafes. When is it going to end with Jews on the left to wake up and realize, number one, this is complete nonsense, and number two, by continuously pursuing that route, you're actually complicit with the enemy.
Yeah. Allow me 2 comments about that. The first is concerning the New Israel Fund that you mentioned. They, by the way, they are a mega power financially, a mega power, something to be concerned about. When I was working with the Jewish establishment, I'll tell you exactly, it was almost 25, 26 years ago, because it was the 50th anniversary. It was the 50th anniversary of Israel's independence.
Yeah.
I remember that because the New Israel Fund sent this package to every Jewish organization in America. They sent it to every JCC, Jewish Community Center in America, and they asked the board of directors of every one of these organizations to sign a pledge reaffirming Israel's Declaration of Independence with the highlight that it was a nation for the Arab rights, the Arab rights. And it was quite deceitful in its intent, so much that almost every American Jewish organization thought this was a wonderful affirmation of coexistence in Israel. And I, in my own institution where I was at, objected. I objected, and I immediately got a fight from one of my colleagues. And he said, I'm going to present it to the board of directors, and I will have them sign. It happened to be an institution where the board of directors were really good diehard Zionists. who simply had no idea who the New Israel Fund was. When I brought it to his attention, he said, I'm going to do it anyhow. And I thought, okay, this is going to be my last day on the job. I was going to confront him and said, if you ask them to sign, I'm going to expose who they are. And I produced a budget, their annual budget. And their annual budget, which was enormous, included, for example, a number of ledger lines, which were, it was several $1 million, which were monies that the New Israel Fund was giving for lawyers in Israel. They would pay for the lawyers who would defend Arab terrorists accused of murder. Okay? The New Israel Fund said that these terrorists couldn't afford the really good lawyers, and so we were going to pay for it. When I exposed this, showing their own budget line, of course, it was not presented to the board of directors, and they did not sign, which can't be said of the scores and scores of other Jewish organizations in America where they did sign, which was a victory for the New Israel Fund. That having been said is the one point. The second point is when you talk about the leftist, I think there are two ways to approach politics when you look at politics in the Middle East and perhaps even elsewhere. The players, is there an agenda? Is there malice behind what they are doing and saying and proposing? Or is it simply stupidity? I think when it comes to the liberal mind, the left of center line, I think that there are a lot of stupid people, as were the many people who signed on to this proclamation that I mentioned. They were simply stupid. They were gullible. They didn't know any better. Why? Because the leftists who were driving the agenda, who were driven by malice, who were driven by this agenda, an anti-Israel agenda, they knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't stupid in the same sense as the others, but they were the ones who were actually driving the train, and the others just sort of followed suit. And that, by the way, happens when you mentioned from the river to the sea. We've all seen this collection of thousands of students on various campuses in America, and I imagine in Canada as well. You're talking about some of the better universities, and when asked which river and which sea, they were clueless. When someone pointed to the sign that one of the girls was holding, she said, oh, I was just asked to hold a sign. Didn't know any better. Which brings to, it always has to be a measure of humor in the things we talk about. It's something which Rabbi Kahane certainly infused in much of what he said. He said the world was just too serious a place for us not to be able to find an occasional moment for levity. I saw an Instagram post. It was very short. It was about a minute and a half long, perhaps, in which they interviewed 4 students, 2 boys and 2 girls. Well, by at least by our definition of what a boy and a girl might be. Right. And they asked the 4 of them a question. They were all standing together, and they said, how long is a quarter of a century? Now, some of the viewers out there might have seen this. How long is a quarter of a century? And the first person said, and they looked at each other for support and said, I think it's 10 years. The other looked at him and said, no, it's 20 years. They conferred, they got together in a huddle, they conferred, and they presented to the person with the microphone who asked the question the answer that they agreed upon. A quarter of a century is 20 years. These are the students at universities in America, and we expect them to understand the justice or the injustice of the conflict that you and I live every day. It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, anti-Semitism is it's just everywhere now. It's so thick. We had an issue here in Canada. It's called the Inspire International Women's Day event that was going to be for the city, Ottawa and Peterborough. And they selected as their keynote speaker a Jewish woman, Leah Goldstein. who 30 years ago, she served in the IDF, but she has unbelievable accomplishments. She cycled across the United States. She broke records. So she was selected to be a keynote speaker. And all of a sudden, there was all kinds of pressure from various pro-Hamas groups contacting the organizers and saying, what are you doing? You know, she served in the IDF, and how could you? How dare you? And so on and so forth. And eventually the organizers said, you know what? We're going to disinvite her now. We're going to replace her. Anyways, we find out about that, and word gets around. We contact our friends and supporters, and we have many on social media. And there was a lot of pressure put on the organization, the organizers, and the sponsors, in fact. We got through to one law firm, in fact, Michigan Law. I was communicating with them, and they said, you know what, we were a sponsor last year, and we didn't really think too much of it. We weren't too sure what's going on with the program for this year. But we're actually not a sponsor this year, but we heard about what's going on with this Jewish woman, and I'm Jewish, and we're outraged, and we're going to issue a statement condemning it. And so they did. And in fact, today they issued another statement, a news release, condemning the whole organization. And then shortly after, this organization, Inspire, they canceled the event completely, the International Women's Day event. Now, it's good. We had an effect. We were effective. There's no question about that. And, you know, we can't turn a blind eye and just say, have a great time by pursuing your anti-Semitism, giving into anti-Semitism and marginalizing our Jewish women. We can't let them get away with that. But really what should happen is that government should step in, and the government was a sponsor for this event as well, Canadian government. Really what they should be doing is the government of Canada has adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, and it's clear what the boundaries are of anti-Semitism, what the definition is, and you know, if people are pursuing that path of anti-Semitism, you have to marginalize them. You can't give them strength. You can't give them support at all. And therefore, if these anti-Semites are ganging up on the International Women's event, the government should step up and say, who are they? Let's investigate. Let's get the police involved. Let's find out who is harassing you, and let's get criminal charges against them so the event could go on properly. But they're not doing that. In the United States, the government has adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, but at the same time, they appointed an envoy on anti-Semitism, Dvora Lipsak, and they formed a committee, actually, to combat anti-Semitism. And in this committee, the Biden administration selected CARE to be part of it. Now, how could you, so you have these problems with the government that they're embracing, and that's taking place in Canada also. A similar organization like CARE is embraced by the government of Canada, and they have an envoy on Islamophobia as well, who embraces all these people, and these are all peaceful protests as they're screaming from the river to the sea, and intifada, globalize the intifada. So, you know, it's just not happening on a governmental level properly. What should happen and what should be just a normal common sense discussion with your elected leaders, and that they should say, yeah, we have to take action. I'm on the phone in a minute with the police, the proper authorities to clamp down. They're not doing that.
Right. You mentioned the American government, and I'm going to make reference to something that we mentioned, I think, only in a sentence or two in the previous broadcast, or perhaps the one before that. It's a numbers game, and I'm going to point the finger once again in our own direction.
Yep.
And it's obscene. In the United States, the Jewish population of the United States is 1.8% of the population of the whole country. It's not the 2.4% that the ADL sometimes uses.
Yeah.
It's 1.8%. So let's average it out and call it 2%. So 2% of the American population is Jewish. The Democratic Party, liberal in all its leanings, and decidedly more anti-Israel as well, politically, over 50%, real number, of the monies that have been collected and sit in the Democratic National Committee's coffers, 50% plus of the dollars were raised by Jews from Jews. 50%. We're talking about 25 to 30 times their number. You would think that the Jews would be smart enough, after all, they are scientists and they're doctors and they're lawyers and everything else. You would think that they'd be smart enough to say, well, we'd like to exact a quid pro quo in exchange for our support for the Democratic Party, which we vote for to the tune of 72, 74% every presidential year, presidential election year. But they don't. They watched Rashida Tlaib, as she did this week, representing the Muslims of Dearborn, Michigan, threatened the Democratic Party and Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has actually, in order to somehow placate this threat that the Arab vote in Michigan, which is a key state, might not vote for him in a primary, whatever, they decided, they came out and said that they were going to ask the people to vote uncommitted. And you wonder where the Jews are to say, first of all, we expect you to support Israel, not those who murdered Jews, but more importantly, remind them that the 50% of the dollar, almost 60 in some cases, percent of the dollars that are raised by us for you. And we expect that quid pro quo. But also, if you're going to have this thing that they call the Yiddish cup, which is absent in most American Jews, you would think that they would remind Biden, well, if they don't vote for you, who are they going to vote for, Joe?
Right.
They're not going to vote for Trump. They're not going to vote for the Republicans. And this idle threat of, well, we're not going to vote at all, would be ensuring a Republican victory in Michigan and possibly a swing state in the 2024 election. So every card is in our hand, and yet the American government has actually bent over backwards to placate the bad guys at the expense of the good guys. And we, the Jewish population of America, its Jewish leadership, with one or two exceptions, the Zionist Organization of America, always the exception to any anti-Israel legislation or policies, we sit silently and watch the American government literally bend knee to the very people who are not only anti-Israel, they're anti-American.
Yeah.
And the question you have to ask is, and I've done a lecture and an op-ed in the past, and I've done it often actually, the myth of Jewish intelligence. It's either that, or, and perhaps it's a combination of, the lack of courage. Or it just might be that they just don't understand the nefarious nature of this enemy. And if October 7th wasn't enough to awaken American Jews, and I'm talking about political people, these are people who are calling for ceasefire. I'm talking about these American Jewish politicians I'm speaking about. They're calling for a ceasefire. They're calling for humanitarian pauses, humanitarian aid. Do you know what? Do you mind if I read? At the end of the podcast, I always offer a quotation, which I prepared, and I'd like to do one. I was going to do it at the end, but it applies here as well, and I like to do that. Okay, Rabbi Meir Kahane quite often cited, as we all do, perhaps the greatest Zionist of all, Zev Jabotinsky. Zev Jabotinsky, who lived from 1880 and died in 1940, having spoken about this impending Holocaust, and actually died in New York, upstate New York, before he had a chance to see it. But I want to read you two paragraphs, which is so germane to the thing. this again, Zev Jabotinsky, and what I'm reading is a passage from the story of the Jewish Legion. Now, this was written, he wrote it originally in 1928,
Right.
but the English translation, from what I understand, the first one was actually done in 1945, which is 5 years after his untimely death. This is what he wrote in 1928, mind you. Talking about almost 100 years ago, and we're talking about 2 decades before Israel was created as a modern Jewish state. This is what he wrote, with a question mark after this first sentence. Everybody is wrong and you alone are right? No doubt this question springs by itself to the reader's lips and mind. It is customary to answer this with apologetic phrases to the effect that I fully respect public opinion, that I bow to it, that I was glad to make concessions. All this is unnecessary, and all this is untrue. You cannot believe in anything in the world if you admit even once that perhaps your opponents are right and you not. This is not the way to do things. There is but one truth in the world, and it is all yours. If you're not sure of it, stay at home. But if you are sure, don't look back, and it will become your way. Is it that
Absolutely.
difficult? Is it that difficult for a Jewish leader, one out of 5.8 million Jews in America, one Jewish leader, to write, utter, and stand by these types of words? What a tragedy we suffer. What a tragedy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I've saved a little one. I know when we sign off, I always have a quote. So having used this one, when we do sign off in a few minutes, I will throw that very little, I'll throw the other one in.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Because we're almost at the end. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. This also is Jabotinsky. I have so much. I love this thing. I spend a lot of my time researching. It's the brilliance which is lacking today. He wrote this in 1940 now. Mind you, 1940, he was 60 years old, and that's when we lost him. In 1940, he wrote this, and he was certainly, as was Rabbi Kahane many decades later, just the quintessential unapologetic Jew. The unapologetic Jew.
Yep.
This is Jabotinsky wrote in 1940. We hold that Zionism is moral and just. And since it is moral and just, justice must be done, no matter whether Joseph or Simon or Ivan or Ahmed agree with it or not. I mean,
100%.
The
That's how it is right now.
The beauty and the truth of its simplicity, Meir.
Yes. Hey, listen, 100%. There's no question about it. A lot of people are waking up right now and saying, you know, they may not be proclaiming that Rabbi Kahane was right, but they're agreeing with how he put it.
I will let you sign off, but I will say one more thing as I bow out. There are 2 wars going on right now. There's a kinetic war that Israel's fighting in Gaza. It's the war the way we traditionally speak of wars. Kinetic war. But there's another war. It's a war of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And we dare not lose either of them.
Right.
Because if we lose either of them, we cease to be. It's a shame.
100%. 100%. I saw a debate earlier on Piers Morgan. It was Rabbi Shmuley Boteach and Jew hater, capo, traitor, Norman Finkelstein.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, Finkelstein, on October 7th, he actually said, he praised Hamas. And he said, glory, hallelujah.
Yeah.
It's like,
you
can't make this stuff up.
I wake up every morning looking at the obituary section, hoping that I see Norman Finkelstein's name there. And every day so far, I've been disappointed.
Well, if you find it, I'll post it on Twitter. I'll get a lot of views.
It's that old Jewish joke. He's going to die on a Jewish holiday. They said that about Arafat. They said that about Gaddafi. And they said, how do you know he's going to die on a Jewish holiday? And the answer was, any day that he dies will become a Jewish holiday. Anyhow, always a pleasure to join you, Meir.
Thank you very much. Shalom, shalom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.